Most people don't stay stuck because they're incapable. They stay stuck because they're waiting. Waiting for confidence, waiting for clarity, waiting for motivation, waiting for a sign that says, now you're ready. And that mindset, more than lack of talent, resources, or opportunity, is what quietly erases entire years of people's lives. If you walk into 2026 still believing that the right time will eventually arrive, you're already behind. Psychologically, the brain is wired to protect you, not propel you. It seeks certainty, safety, and predictability. So when you say, I'm just not ready yet, your brain hears, good, we can stay where it's familiar. This isn't wisdom. It's self-preservation dressed up as patience. And the danger is that it feels responsible, mature, thoughtful. But underneath it, it's avoidance. Here's the truth most people don't like to hear. Clarity does not come before action. It comes from action. Confidence doesn't appear and then invite you to move. Movement creates confidence. Momentum changes perception. You don't think your way into a new life. You behave your way into one. Philosophers have understood this for centuries. Aristotle believed character is formed through repeated action, not intention. Existential thinkers later argued that meaning is created through choice, not contemplation. Modern psychology backs this up with overwhelming evidence. Behavior changes identity faster than insight ever could. Yet people still sit on the sidelines waiting to feel different before doing something different. That's the trap. Waiting feels productive because you're thinking, planning, researching. But thinking without action is just motionlessness with better language. You can read every book, listen to every podcast, and analyze every angle, and still be standing exactly where you started. Not because you're lazy, but because you've been taught that readiness is a prerequisite. It's not. Look closely at the moments that actually changed your life. You didn't feel ready. You felt uncertain, maybe even afraid. But you acted anyway. The job you took, the conversation you finally had, the decision you couldn't undo once it was made. Those moments didn't come with clarity attached. They produced it afterward. Waiting also creates a dangerous illusion of control. It convinces you that if you just delay long enough, you can avoid discomfort, failure, or rejection. But there is no future where growth is painless. The only thing waiting does is guarantee regret, because time moves forward whether you act or not. And when you don't choose, life chooses for you. Neuroscience explains why this cycle is so hard to break. Every time you postpone action, your brain rewards you with temporary relief. That relief reinforces avoidance. Over time, waiting becomes habitual. And habits, not intentions, shape your outcomes. So by the time the year ends, you're not dealing with one missed opportunity. You're dealing with an identity that sees delay as normal. And this is where it becomes philosophical. At some point, waiting stops being about timing and starts being about who you believe you are. When you say, I'll do it when I'm ready, what you're really saying is, I don't trust myself to figure it out as I go. That belief is far more limiting than any external obstacle. The people who create change don't have better circumstances. They have a different relationship with uncertainty. They understand that discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that something new is forming. They don't wait for fear to disappear. They act while carrying it. If you bring the waiting mindset into 2026, you'll tell yourself the same story. with a different calendar. You'll call it strategy. You'll call it patience. You'll call it being realistic. But deep down, you'll know you didn't move when you could have. There is no moment when the path becomes fully visible. You see the next step only after you take the one in front of you. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with. The cost of waiting is always invisible at first. But by the time you feel it, you've already lost the time you can never get back. There's a subtle mindset that keeps people locked in place far longer than failure ever could, and that's the victim narrative, not the obvious kind, where someone openly says, nothing is my fault. I'm talking about the quieter version, the one that sounds reasonable, the one that explains why things didn't work out, why someone else had an advantage, why the timing was wrong, why life dealt you a harder hand. And let's be clear, some of those explanations are true. People experience loss, injustice, betrayal, and circumstances they did not choose. Acknowledging reality isn't the problem. Staying inside the story long after it has served its purpose is. Psychologically, the victim mindset is seductive because it removes responsibility without removing self-respect. It allows you to say, I'm not where I want to be, but it makes sense. And when something makes sense, the brain relaxes. It stops pushing for change. That's why this mindset is so dangerous. It soothes you while it slowly shrinks your agency. The brain is always looking for a cause and effect narrative. When something doesn't go your way, it wants a reason. That's healthy. But when that reason consistently lives outside of you, you train your mind to believe that power also lives outside of you. Over time, this creates learned helplessness, the psychological state where effort feels pointless because outcomes feel predetermined. Philosophically, this is where people confuse explanation with identity. Something happened to you, but it is not who you are. When you fuse your sense of self to past harm, disappointment, or unfairness, you don't just remember it, you carry it forward. And whatever you carry forward shapes the decisions you make. Today, here's the uncomfortable truth of the victim narrative feels safe because it gives your pain meaning without demanding transformation. You don't have to change if the problem is always
up there.
You don't have to risk failure again if you can justify not trying. But safety is not freedom, and validation is not the same as empowerment. You can be both right about what hurt you and wrong about what you do next. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that letting go of the victim mindset means minimizing what they went through. It doesn't. It means refusing to let the past dictate your future. Trauma explains behavior, but it doesn't excuse staying stuck forever. The growth begins at the point where empathy for yourself meets accountability to yourself. From a neurological perspective, every time you retell a story of how you were wronged without adding a new chapter of agency, your brain strengthens that narrative. Neural pathways don't care whether a story is useful. They care whether it's repeated. So the question isn't, is my story true? The question is my story helping me become who I want to be? And here's the shift that changes everything. Responsibility is not blame. Responsibility is ownership of the next move. Blame keeps your eyes in the rearview mirror. Responsibility puts your hands back on the wheel. You don't need to deny the road was unfair. You just need to decide who's driving now. The most powerful people you admire aren't the ones who never suffered. They're the ones who refused to let suffering become their identity. They stopped rehearsing the reasons they couldn't and started practicing the behaviors of someone who could. Not overnight, not perfectly, but deliberately. If you carry resentment, bitterness, or a constant need to prove you were wronged into 2026, you're not protecting yourself, you're anchoring yourself. And anchors are heavy. They don't stop storms. They stop movement. Letting go of the victim narrative doesn't mean pretending everything was fine. It means deciding that your future deserves more attention than your past. So here's what I want you to sit with. You don't reclaim your power by reliving what hurt you. You reclaim it the moment. Choose to move forward without needing the past. To change first. There's a lie that sounds gentle, reasonable, even healthy on the surface. And that lie is that comfort equals happiness. It doesn't. Comfort equals familiarity. And familiarity, while calming to the nervous system, is one of the most efficient ways to quietly stop growing without realizing it. Most people don't consciously choose stagnation. They choose comfort. They choose routines that feel manageable, relationships that don't challenge them, work that doesn't demand more than they already know how to give. And they tell themselves they're being grateful, patient, or balanced. But deep down, there's a low-level restlessness they can't quite name. That restlessness is information. It's the signal that something inside you is asking to expand, and you keep pressing mute. From a psychological perspective, the brain loves comfort because it minimizes energy use and perceived risk. The familiar requires less cognitive effort. It feels efficient, safe. But the brain's preference for efficiency has nothing to do with fulfillment. In fact, many of the emotions we associate with meaning, pride, confidence, self-trust, are born in moments of discomfort. You don't feel proud of what costs you nothing. Philosophically, growth has always been tied to friction. Ancient thinkers didn't talk about ease as the path to purpose. They talked about discipline, virtue, and deliberate struggle. Not because struggle is noble in itself, but because it shapes the inner world. You don't discover who you are when everything is easy. You discover it when you're tested. Romanticizing comfort is especially dangerous because it disguises itself as self-care. And real self-care matters. Rest matters. Recovery matters. But there's a difference between restoration and avoidance. Rest prepares you to re-enter the challenge. Avoidance keeps you permanently on the sidelines, telling yourself you're protecting your peace while quietly abandoning your potential. Look at how this shows up in everyday decisions. You stay quiet instead of speaking up because it's easier. You delay starting something because disruption feels exhausting. You keep saying yes to what's familiar even when it no longer fits. None of these choices feel dramatic, but taken together, they shape a life that feels increasingly small. Neuroscience shows that discomfort isn't actually the enemy we think it is. The nervous system adapts to stress through exposure, not avoidance. Each time you choose the harder option, the honest conversation, the stretch assignment, the discipline habit, you expand your capacity. Discomfort shrinks when you face it repeatedly. A comfort shrinks you when you cling to it. There's also an identity cost to choosing comfort too often. Over time, you stop seeing yourself as someone who can handle hard things. Self-trust erodes. And without self-trust, confidence becomes performative rather than earned. You may look fine on the outside, but inside, You know you're not living at your edge. What makes this especially relevant as you move into 2026 is that the world does not reward comfort. It rewards adaptability, resilience, and the ability to do hard things consistently. A discipline doesn't restrict freedom. It creates it. The freedom to choose yourself. The freedom to outgrow old patterns. The freedom to respect the person you're becoming. And here's the part that matters most. Discomfort is temporary. Regret is not. You can tolerate a difficult season far more easily than you can live with the quiet awareness that you never tried. A comfort today often becomes disappointment later because you didn't fail, but you also didn't move. The choosing discomfort doesn't mean burning your life down or living in constant intensity. It means telling the truth instead of staying silent. It means doing the thing that scares you a little because you know it's aligned. It means accepting that growth will interrupt your routine and deciding that interruption is worth it. If you enter 2026 still negotiating with comfort, you'll keep choosing what's easy over what's meaningful. But if you let comfort stop being your compass, everything changes. So hold on to this. Your future won't be built by what feels good today. It will be shaped by what you're willing to do. When comfort asks you to stay and growth asks you to move. One of the most common phrases people use to comfort themselves is, "I'll deal with it later." Later, when things slow down. Later, when you have more energy. Later, when you're in a better headspace. It sounds harmless, responsible even. Over time, that phrase becomes a philosophy. And that philosophy quietly teaches you to live in postponement. The problem with later is that it's vague. It has no edges. And because it has no deadline, your brain treats it optional. Psychologically, procrastination isn't about laziness. It's about emotional regulation. You delay not because you don't know what to do, but because doing it would bring up discomfort, anxiety, self-doubt, boredom, or fear of getting it wrong. So your brain chooses relief over progress. Every time you postpone something important, you get a short-term reward. The tension drops. The stress fades. And your brain learns something dangerous. Avoidance works. That lesson gets reinforced again and again until delay becomes automatic. You don't consciously decide to put things off. You default to it. And by the time you notice the pattern, it's already shaping your identity. Here's where philosophy enters the conversation. There's an old idea that time is neutral, but your relationship to it isn't. The way you use today decides the weight of tomorrow. When you postpone what matters, you're not freezing time. You're transferring cost. And interest accrues. Problems don't stay the same size while you wait. They grow roots. Habits deepen. Opportunities narrow. Think about how many things would be easier if you'd handled them when they were small. The conversation you avoided that turned into resentment. The habit you delayed that became a health issue. The decision you postponed that closed doors you didn't even realize were open. Later rarely makes things simpler. It makes them heavier. Neuroscience reinforces this truth. The brain relies on patterns, not intentions. When you consistently delay action, you wire your nervous system for hesitation. Starting begins to feel harder than it actually is. And because action feels harder, you delay again. This feedback loop doesn't just affect productivity. It affects self-respect. You begin to distrust your own promises to yourself. And once trust erodes, motivation disappears. Because why would your brain invest energy in goals doesn't believe you'll follow through on. There's also a deeper existential cost to postponement. When you live in later, you disconnect from the present moment as a place of power. Life becomes something that's always about to start. Next month, next year, after one more adjustment. But life doesn't begin later. It only ever unfolds now. And when too many no's are wasted, you're left with the unsettling feeling that time moved faster than you did. Urgency isn't panic. It's respect for reality. It's understanding that action has a window, and windows close. The most effective people don't wait until they feel urgent. They act before urgency is forced on them by consequence. This doesn't mean you act recklessly or impulsively. It means you stop pretending that tomorrow is guaranteed or that motivation will magically appear. You act because the act itself creates momentum. The smallest step taken now is more powerful than the perfect plan delayed indefinitely. As 2026 approaches, ask yourself how many things you've been meaning to fix, start, say, or stop. Not someday, not later, just honestly. Those unresolved intentions aren't neutral. They're draining energy every day. They remain unresolved. They sit in the background of your mind, quietly reminding you of who you said you'd be and haven't become yet. Handling something now, even imperfectly, closes an open loop. It restores integrity between your thoughts and your actions. And that integrity is fuel. It gives you clarity, confidence, and the sense that your life is moving forward again. So take this with you. The future doesn't punish you for acting too soon. It punishes you for waiting too long. One of the most overlooked traps people fall into as the calendar flips to a new year is carrying forward the same limited of themselves. We think growth is external. New goals, new schedules, new routines. But real transformation begins internally in how you perceive yourself. If you bring last year's identity into 2026, you'll unconsciously recreate last year's outcomes. And that is the quietest, most insidious form of self-sabotage there is. Psychologically, this makes sense. Our brains are wired to seek consistency, identity. How we define who we are acts like an autopilot. It filters information, shapes our decisions, and even influences our memory. When you think of yourself in a limited way, I'm not the kind of person who can start a business, speak in public, or pursue that relationship. Your mind will bend reality to confirm that belief. You won't even notice it happening. Your actions, your attention, and your choices will all align with that internal story, even if it silently undermines your goals. Philosophically, this is profound. The people who achieve remarkable things aren't more talented, luckier, or smarter. They are willing to rewrite who they believe they are. They refuse to let past self concepts dictate future potential. They understand that identity is not a fixed state. It is an ongoing creation. Every choice, every action, every thought contributes to the version of yourself that will step into tomorrow. Here's where most people get it wrong. They think change is about doing more or trying harder. But doing more while thinking the same way is like planting seeds in infertile soil. You can work relentlessly and still fail if you haven't first upgraded the way you see yourself. Growth doesn't start with habits, it starts with identity. You don't fix your outcomes, you fix your identity, and the outcomes follow. Psychologically, this is supported by the principle of identity-based habits. Research shows that the most sustainable changes happen when they align with your self image. People don't just quit smoking because they want better health. They quit because they see themselves as someone who doesn't smoke. They don't start exercising because they want a six-pack. They start because they see themselves as someone who values strength and movement. Identity precedes behavior. Behavior alone can't sustain transformation. This is where a mindset shift becomes crucial as we step into 2026. Ask yourself, who are you bringing into the new year? Are you bringing a version of yourself that has settled, that hesitates, that avoids risk, that doubts its worth? Or are you intentionally shedding that limited self and stepping into someone capable of more than you believed last year? Carrying last year's identity forward is a subtle kind of regression. You might hit some superficial wins. Maybe you cross off tasks or stick to a routine. But the real breakthroughs won't happen. The reason is simple. Your inner map hasn't expanded. You're navigating tomorrow with yesterday's compass. And when the compass is outdated, you end up in familiar places, not new ones. New ones. Identity is also deeply tied to narrative. The stories you tell yourself about who you are shape every decision. If your story is, I'm always late, I can't stick to plans, I'm not disciplined enough, those stories will play out whether you consciously intend them to or not. Writing the story doesn't mean pretending everything is perfect. It means actively questioning which beliefs are yours, which were inherited, and which no longer serve the version of yourself you want to be. Philosophers and psychologists alike have recognized this tension between who we are and who we can become. Existentialist thought emphasizes that existence precedes essence, that you are not a finished product, but a work in progress. Yet most people act as if essence is fixed, letting outdated definitions of self limit the very life they crave. The practical implication is clear. If you want a different 2026, you must think bigger about who you are allowed to become, not about what you can do, but who you can be. And this isn't hypothetical. Every choice you make, the habits you adopt, the risks you take, the relationships you nurture, either reinforces your old identity or builds a new one. It's never neutral. So as we close this reflection, consider this. Your future outcomes are already being written, not by your plans, your goals, or your intentions, but by the version of yourself you carry forward. If you enter 2026 believing you are the same person you were last year, you will get last year's results. But if you step into the year intentionally, willing to expand your identity, you open the door to results that feel impossible right now. Here's the truth to hold on to. You cannot outgrow your life while remaining the same person. To change what you do, you must first change who you believe you are.